Okay, tonight,
You don't have to do anything. It sounds like.
if everyone can just mute yourself. Okay, tonight we're starting on chapter 7, and it is a very interesting topic. It's sort of an extension of chapter 6 that we did last class. And we had a lot of questions at the end, and let's sort of rehash it a little bit. And I'm going to share my screen and let us just jump right away into chapter 7. However, I'm just doing the black here, the bold. The vitalizing animal soul in the Jew, which is derived from the side of the klippa, and which clothes itself in the human being's blood, as stated above, and the soul of the animals, beasts, birds, and fish, which are pure according to the laws of the Torah and are thus permitted for Jewish consumption, as also the existence and vitality of everything in the inanimate and the vegetable world that is permissible for consumption. We're just going to read a little bit and then we're going to unpack this. So too the existence and vitality of every act, utterance, and thought in mundane matters that contain no forbidden aspect, being neither root nor branch of the 365 prohibited precepts and their offshoots, prohibited either in the explicit authority of the Torah or by the rabbinic enactment. Yet when these permitted thoughts, utterances, or acts are not performed for the sake of heaven as they ought to be, let's just continue. Instead, they serve only the will, desire, and lust of the individual, of the body. And even where it is in need of the body and necessary for its very preservation and life, such as eating, which the body requires for its very existence, and without it cannot possibly live. Thus, the act itself cannot be faulted if I want to eat, but the fault lies in that his or her intention is not for the sake of heaven, i.e., to utilize his or her body as an instrument in the service of God. Okay, so what does this mean? We have a situation here that the Tanya in chapter 7 is telling us that there are many things which are not a prohibition. Steak is not a prohibition. Steak is a piece of food. Cheesecake is not a prohibition. We're talking kosher cheesecake, then it's fine, it's kosher cheesecake. What we're discussing here tonight is what happens if I use this steak or use this cheesecake or use this bottle of wine, and for what intention am I doing it for? If I'm eating chicken because it's dinner time and I need to eat, otherwise I'm going to die. So then, of course, you make a bracha, you make a blessing, you eat your dinner, and amazing. But if you're going to be gluttonous because all you want to do is drink and guzzle 9 glasses of wine, or 3 pieces of a tomahawk steak at $120 a pop, so it may not be sinful because there was no sin here. There is no prohibition. It does not say thou shalt not eat $120 tomahawk steaks in a restaurant. There's no sin. There's no prohibition here. But on the other hand, you can't call it a mitzvah. So we have a neutral territory according to this chapter 7 of Tanya. You have things which are not in definition intrinsically a prohibition, but it depends how I'm engaging with that item. If we're dealing with a cheeseburger, then of course it's a prohibition, it's a sin. It says thou shalt eat kosher, so if you're eating not kosher, it's a prohibition. But if I'm engaging with something which is not intrinsically sinful, it's not here, it's not there. It's just a piece of steak. It's just a piece of gum. It's just a glass of wine. So then the question is, how am I engaging with this item? I don't want to get into a political discussion, but I think guns is a very good example. Guns is not intrinsically evil. People who murder are intrinsically bad and they deserve either life sentence or the death sentence. I'm not going to have that discussion today. But the gun itself could be used for murder, and it could be used for saving a slaughterhouse. It could be used for saving someone that wants to murder many, many people. So the same gun could be used for good, it could be used for bad. The gun itself has no intrinsic definition. It's not here, it's not there. There are things which are intrinsically good. The parchment from a Torah is intrinsically good. Studying for an hour of Torah is intrinsically good. Lighting Shabbat candles is intrinsically good. There are things which are intrinsically good. What we're doing now is intrinsically good. It's good, it's holy, it's divine. And then there are prohibitions which are sinful. Not to be with another man's wife is intrinsically not good. Not to murder, not to steal, not to be cruel to animals, not to be cruel to people. These are intrinsically bad things, and it's a prohibition. The Tanya chapter 7 is talking about this new category called the middle ground, the gray area. It's not here, it's not there. And what the Tanya is telling us is every single item in life on planet Earth has energy. Just like scientifically we say things are made up of protons and neutrons, molecules, atoms, pluses, minuses, and so on and so forth. According to the Kabbalah, everything also has godly energy in it. There are items on planet Earth which have divine holy energy, like the Torah, like the candles, like the tefillin. And there are things which it's still godly energy, but it comes from the side of the other side. In Kabbalah, we call it the Sitra Achra. We don't want to call it evil because a pig is not evil. We just call it comes from the unclean energy. So God, of course, has to make a pig also be a pig. And how could it still exist if God says, I don't want it, I don't want you, the Jew, to eat it? But God is still giving that life force into things which are not good. So we call it unclean energy, like a pig. A cheeseburger has unclean energy. How can a slice of cheese and a hamburger coexist together if God says, I don't want you to have it? It's still existing because it has energy, godly energy, because Judaism believes that everything has godly energy, but it's emanating from the unclean energy, from the Sitra Achra, from the other side. Not from the way God would speak to Moses, or God would speak to you, or God would give the Torah, but the same way God is giving a thief energy to continue to exist. After that thief made the free choice to do something bad, God is giving that person energy, but that energy, that life force, is coming from the unclean side of God. In Hebrew, we call that Sitra Achra, the other side. Haman, all these bad people. And it doesn't have to be bad people. Even when Mendel Schwartz has a weekday and I slip up and God forbid I eat a cheeseburger or a non-kosher cheesecake, whatever the case is. So I'm digesting in me this unclean energy, the Sitra Achra, because it's a prohibition what I just did. So what's now being infused in Mendel Schwartz is this Sitra Achra energy, this unclean energy, or if we're not talking about eating, but let's say I'm stealing. So I'm using my mind, I'm using my hands, and now I'm becoming this chariot and this vehicle for welcoming and accepting and embracing, so to speak, even subconsciously, not consciously, of this bad, unclean energy. But then you have this tricky ground, this middle ground that we're talking about here in chapter 7, where it's not here, it's not there. I didn't steal. All I'm doing is having this $120 tomahawk steak, or I'm on my 9th bottle of Heineken beer. There's no sin. There's no prohibition against drinking 9 bottles of beer. But I can't convince my parents that it's a mitzvah, unless, of course, it's Purim. So this middle ground is tricky because it depends what I'm doing this act for. If I'm doing the act of drinking bottles of beer because it's Shabbos and it's a mitzvah to be joyous on Shabbos or on the holiday, or it's Purim and I'm supposed to get so blitzed, I don't know the difference between Haman and Mordechai. So 9 bottles of beer is kosher. It's a mitzvah. And now I'm taking the energy and I'm elevating it to something divine. Or even a regular Tuesday night dinner. If I make a blessing and I recognize that my dinner tonight is food because I need to live and I want to function as a good person. So again, I'm taking that chicken, I'm taking that life force in my food and my green beans, squash, whatever I'm eating tonight, and I'm elevating it. Even if you didn't make a blessing, which you should make a blessing, but even if you didn't, but yeah, I mean, we're not talking about meditating for an hour before I drink my glass of orange juice. The idea that I need to live and I need to have dinner, so that's kosher, that's fine. Especially we're talking about kosher food. But if I'm being gluttonous, if I'm not doing it for the sake of living and being a good person tonight or being a good person tomorrow, but I'm self-indulging myself. So now that energy is being degraded. It's being schlepped down. So something which had klippas noga, which we said before, the klippa, which was a middle ground territory of energy. It wasn't divine. It wasn't a prohibition. It was a middle ground klippas noga, like we said with the steaks and the cheesecakes and the wine. It's not here, it's not there. So that energy, that life force in a regular piece of chicken or cheesecake, or where we said green beans or whatever it is, or bottles of beer, it's getting energy from the klippa noga. It's what we call the middle ground energy, right? Not here, not there. And how I engage it, it will determine, will the energy be elevated to something divine, whether because I made a blessing on it, or whether because I recognize I want to be a Jew and I want to exist tomorrow and I want to live tomorrow, or I want to be a good husband, like we were explaining in last class. So these are all good acts. And now that those items that I'm engaging with is being elevated. But if I'm not, I'm just being self-indulging. So again, it's not a prohibition, but the energy and the life force and the vitality is being schlepped down. Does that make sense to anybody? I'm just opening up some windows over here. Give me a minute. Does that make sense, Andre?
Yes.
And then there are some things in the middle ground which, like, we're not so sure, is it being, and honestly, each one sort of has to ask themselves and be honest with themselves. Am I going to the gym to be healthy? Or am I going to the gym so I can, get hit on and look sexy and just get, I don't know, a better Instagram picture, whatever the case is, I don't know. So it's really also up to the people. We didn't have the LA Fitness or Equinox 100 years ago in Warsaw, in Poland. So they had their own examples, their own culture that they had to deal with. What were those items which were the neutral territory, the neutral ground, for them to ask themselves, am I doing something and elevating it, or am I doing something and schlepping it down? That's why, my father on Rosh Hashanah, when he would push the idea of everyone make New Year's resolutions, and people would say, New Year's resolutions, I'm going to go to the gym twice a week. I'm going to go to the gym and I'm going to be a better citizen, or I'm just going to be a better citizen for my New Year's resolutions. So those are all fine. Those are all good. But it's not necessarily something divine to go to LA Fitness. You're a better person. You're certainly a healthier person by going to the gym, but are you more of a divine person? Are you have more of a relationship with God as a result of going to the gym? So if you say yes, I personally say yes to that. I work out 3 times a week. I hit the elliptical today as well for 45 minutes at a time because I want to be healthy. And I know that if I'm a healthier person, I will be a healthier rabbi. If I'm going just for, self-gratitude or just because I want to, whatever the case is, like I said, just to get on the next Vogue magazine or something, then I'm not sure I can justify saying that with a straight face. Yes, by going to the gym, I'm going to be a better Jew and I have a better relationship with God. So too, if I go to the restaurant and I eat that $120 tomahawk steak, again, I have to ask myself, am I becoming a better husband? And I'll say the answer is yes, because I went on a nice date night with my wife. I don't spend $120. Don't worry about it, guys. I think $50 is my way max. And even that, I'm slightly uncomfortable. But the point is, if I'm comfortable and if I can say this is a date night with my wife and this is worth the $50 steak and the restaurant and the food and the French fries and everything else, and because I'm a better husband and now I have a better wife and I'm as a healthier couple, and I can function as a better rabbi and as a better individual in my community and for my family, and that answer is yes, then by all means. Right? There's some people that if they're going to go out to a restaurant with their wife and they only order that $50 steak, the wife or the husband is going to be very downtrodden about it. They have to eat that $250 steak. So that's what I'm saying. Each one on their own. And of course, in Warsaw, Poland, 100 years ago, there was no restaurant with tomahawk steaks for $100, $200. So that's why I believe in every community it's different. I believe in every generation it's different. And I think the examples that the Alter Rebbe brought in chapter 7, I'm going to go back to sharing my screen, of the examples of that middle territory is examples of his time. Let's continue. If this spiritual intent is absent, all these acts, whether I'm jogging or utterances, whether I'm speaking or frolicking and hanging out and schmoozing with people and thoughts, then if it's absent of spiritual intent, then it is no better than the vitalizing animal soul itself. How is it better? And as if it's not for the purpose of the divine, then what's the difference between those acts and the animal soul? What's the animal soul, as we explained earlier? The animal soul is self-serving. Animal soul is survival. And everything in this totality of things, i.e. the soul with its actions, utterances, and thoughts, flows and is drawn from the second gradation of the klipot and the sitra achra, which is in the progressively ascending order of klipot, the fourth klippa called klippat noga. Again, these were the klippa, the different levels I was telling you about before. Let's continue. Let me just scroll down a little bit. Okay. Now, the klippat noga, this was that middle ground I was telling you about, is an intermediate category between the 3 completely unclean klipot, like I was telling you, the energy, the unclean klipot, which is allowing an animal to exist. These are prohibitions. And the intermediate category is between the 3 completely unclean klipot and a category and order of sanctity. So that's that middle ground between the divine and the unclean. Divine is mitzvot, the unclean is things which are prohibitive. So that's the middle ground that we were talking about before. Hence, it is sometimes absorbed and brought down and descends within the 3 unclean klipot. And at the other times, it could be absorbed like that steak and elevated to the category and level of sanctity. So here he brings the example that I was speaking about before. For instance, if one eats fat beef, and drinks spiced wine, not out of physical desire, but he does it in order to broaden his or her mind for the service of God and for his or her Torah. All right, this was written 100 years ago before the females were on the case here. So I'm going to take the liberty of adding that. As Rava said, he's a great rabbi, wine and fragrance make my mind more receptive. So if this great rabbi is going to take spices, or he's going to drink a nice glass of wine so he can better study. Some people need a cigar. So this is all fine. This is all fair game. and in order to fulfill the commandment to enjoy the Shabbat on the festivals, then certainly you're allowed to have the glass of wine and the good food. So when one eats and drinks in the above mentioned manner, then the vitality of the meat and the wine, which originated in the Klippat Noga, is then extracted from the evil and ascends to God like a burnt offering and sacrifice. This is when you did it with good intent. So too concerning speech, the vitality of words spoken for a sacred purpose ascends and is absorbed in sanctity. For example, he who makes a humorous remark, if a person makes a joke to sharpen his mind and make his heart rejoice in God and his Torah and service, which should be practically practiced joyfully. As Rava, this great rabbi, was wont to do with his pupils, prefacing his discourse with a humorous remark, whereupon the students became cheerful. You should know when I give speeches, public speeches, I try to sneak in a joke. Why? Because the joke is to lighten the crowd, not because I'm a comedian, I'm trying to lighten the crowd, it's because I want to follow it up with a piece of Torah. And if I have the crowd, I bought the crowd through the joke, then I can easily deliver my piece of Torah, whatever I'm trying to say. Okay. On the other hand, if a person is one of those who gluttonously eats meat and quaff wine in order to satisfy their bodily appetites and animal soul, then since of the animal soul's 4 evil elements, this desire belongs to the element of water, from which comes the appetite for pleasures. If you remember at chapter 1, at the very end, we spoke about different elements: water, fire, wind, and dust. And there are certain habits that people do which come from one of those 4 elements. When a person is lazy, it's coming from the element of dust, dirt. When a person is haughty, coming from fire. When a person is frivolous with his speech and he speaks unclean or gossiping, we put that with wind. These are different elements. And when a person is gluttonous with his food and his drinks, that comes from the element of water, because water grows all those foods. So in such case, the vitality of the meat and wine that he ingested is thereby degraded and absorbed temporarily in the utter evil of the 3 unclean klipot. Because again, if I'm going to eat a piece of meat just for self-glutton, because I'm a glutton, so there's not much difference between the kosher meat eating in a gluttonous way and a non-kosher meat. What's the difference? What's the difference, if anyone wants to tell me, if I'm gluttonous with my food or I'm frivolous with my speech, and the Tanya just told us it's not any better than a non-kosher piece of meat itself, so then what's really the difference? Or is there no difference? I'll just cut to the chase. In Hebrew, this is good to write down. In Hebrew, something which is a prohibition is called asur. It's Hebrew letters, but I'll just tell it to you in English. Asur, A-S-S-U-R, asur. In Hebrew, it's aleph, samach, vav, resh. Something which is permitted, an act which is permissible, is mutar, M-U-T-A-R. So when the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, says, on Shabbat, it's asur, it's prohibited. You're not allowed to carry in a public domain. You're not allowed to get into that, whatever the case is. You cannot eat the cheeseburger. It's asur. Sometimes they tell you it's mutar. You're allowed to. You're allowed to walk on Shabbat if there's a string around the community. You're allowed to put hot water in my coffee and it's not considered cooking. It's mutar. What do these Hebrew words actually mean? It's beautiful. Asur means it's tied. In English, we just say it's a prohibition. But in Hebrew, asur does not mean prohibition. That's just a fancy English word we gave to it. But in the Code of Jewish Law or in the Talmud, when it says asur, when it says it's prohibited, It does not mean prohibited. It means tied down. T-I-E-D. It is tied down. Mutar means released. We say it's permissible. It's a fancy word, but it means released. Mutar means released. It is not tied down. So if I eat a piece of food, which is asur, which is a prohibition, it is tied down, which means if after I ate it, if I ate this non-kosher food, which we say is asur, it is tied down. It means I cannot do teshuvah, I cannot repent. I cannot say, I'm going to eat this non-kosher meat, but I'm now going to go to synagogue because I have energy and I'm able to pray a little bit better tonight because I just came back from McDonald's. We say, it is asur. That food will forever be tied down to the realm of unclean energy. I cannot release it. It is tied down. You can go to synagogue and repent, but that unclean food will always be unclean. You can never release it. You can never make a cheeseburger kosher. It's not going to happen. It is tied down. You personally can go to synagogue and do repentance, or you can just go to your own home that night and repent, but you can never untie that cheeseburger. It can never be kosher, nor can you say, I'm going to eat the cheeseburger because it's going to give me better energy to pray tonight. No, it is always tied down. What does mutar mean? Mutar, as we said, means released. It means you can release it. You can release that energy and elevate it to the divine. So when we say eating a kosher hamburger like I had tonight is mutar, means it's released, it's untied. I can take that energy and release it and elevate it to the divine. In English, they were fancy. They said prohibition, things like that. But in Hebrew, it's actually much nicer. Is it tied down and it's off limits? Or is it, and that's why it said over there. So that's the difference between a non-kosher food and a kosher food. If I ate the kosher food with not good intentions and I was being a glutton, what's the difference? Because the kosher piece of steak or the 9 bottles of Heineken, if I was gluttonous and I ate it or drank it, it's true that I'm a glutton. And it's true that I slept that energy and degraded it, but I only degraded temporarily. Because if I so choose to use that energy that I have in me with that wine in my system or the food in my system, and I say, you know what, I want to be a better person tonight, immediately, it's released and I can elevate that energy. But I cannot do that with non-kosher wine. I cannot do that with a cheeseburger. It's always going to be tied down. The same thing goes with thoughts and speech. Food's just an easier example. But if I'm hanging out for 3 hours with my guy friends and all we're doing is gossiping and just shoving the bull with no positive anything involved, not to be better anything. So it's almost like I'm gossiping and I'm speaking not nice. Again, this is a very high extreme example because of course, as a rabbi today, all I would want is for my friends and for people to just get together and hang out. But again, it's just an extreme example. But I'm just showing you the nuances over here that am I doing a kosher act, but if I'm doing it with wrong intentions, I'm schlepping it down, you're degrading the energy, or am I elevating the energy? That's all. So that's what we discussed here in chapter 7. We discussed Sitra Achra, which is the other side, the unclean energy. And it's important to note when people say, does God exist within evil? Yes, he does. Is God infusing evil people with energy? Unfortunately, yes, he does. He gave people free choice. Is God infusing energy to prohibitive food? Yes, he does. God is everywhere and in everything. So that means God's energy is even in shellfish, and God's energy is even in pork and everything else. These things are not void of godly energy. The only difference is, says Kabbalah, is that the energy in those prohibitive items are sitra achra, unclean energy, unclean godly vitality type of source of energy. So we want to stay away from it because it has unclean energy. God is telling us that shellfish or pork and these things, or being with another man's wife, God is telling us it is unclean energy. Not to kill, not to steal, not to be disrespectful. It is unclean energy. So stay away from it. It is asur. It is tied down. You can never elevate it. But chapter 7, the bulk of it was not discussing that category. It was discussing the middle category, which I like to call 50 Shades of Gray. There's a lot of shades here. There's a lot of different examples over here. Because someone that would think, well, if I'm not studying Torah and I'm hanging out with my friends with 15 guys, I'm just hanging out, someone would say, oh, that's a great area. Doesn't say thou shalt hang out with 15 friends and shove the bull on a couch. Yeah, but I can respond, but it's not a prohibition. So then what is it? Well, it depends what you make of it. Depends what you make of that dinner. Depends what you make of that outing at a restaurant. Depends what you make of those 9 bottles of Heineken. Depends what you make of the Hollywood Bowl. Depends what you make of the LA Fitness and things like that. So it's really up to us. No one can decide for me. I remember once my rabbi years ago when I was 17 says, why are you so into your body? I said, what are you talking about? So what are you so into going to the gym for? So I said, what do you mean? I'm trying to be healthy. So he says, yeah, but you don't see really Hasidic Jews going to the gym. I was like, I said, listen, I'm a California boy. I like to go to the gym. Leave me alone. You know? So, and I believe I was right. But again, there's 50 Shades of Gray. From his perspective, he may be right. So it's interesting that this chapter 7 leaves a lot for the reader to decipher and to decide, what's fair game. I always found this somewhat unique, this chapter, because a lot of other things are, much more crystal clear. We know what's allowed, we know what's permissible, we know what's prohibitive, and then there's this middle ground, which is a very unique area over here. And we'll leave it at that. Somewhat of a shorter chapter, and we'll call it a night. And I'll leave it open for any questions.